Caleb walked into my house that Tuesday morning as if he owned the place. He did not knock, he did not wait for me to invite him in. He simply opened the door and stepped inside while I was pouring my coffee. His face was set with determination, and the words came out sharp and heavy. "Mom, we are moving in. Me, Brianna, the kids, and Brianna's mother. The apartment is too small. We already made the decision. There is no discussion." For a moment, the sound of those words echoed louder than the clink of the spoon in my cup. 40 years of scrubbing hotel rooms, saving every dollar, paying every bill on time, had given me this roof over my head. And now, without so much as a question, my son was announcing that my quiet life would no longer belong to me. I did not shout, I did not beg. I only lifted my eyes to him and gave the smallest nod. On the outside, I looked like a tired woman surrendering to her son's will. But inside, my mind was moving fast, sharper than it had in years. Caleb thought he was deciding my life. What he did not know was that I had already begun to decide his future. My name is Helen Crawford. I am 70 years old, and for most of my life I was a housekeeper at a lakeside hotel. The work was long and thankless. I scrubbed floors, changed sheets, and polished windows until my back ached and my hands cracked from the cleaning chemicals. I raised 3 children while working those shifts, paid the bills, and little by little, I managed to pay off the mortgage on this house. It was the one thing I could truly call mine after decades of serving others. Since my husband passed away 10 years ago, I have lived here alone. People imagine that living alone at my age must be lonely, but that is not my truth. I enjoy the freedom of choosing how to spend my mornings. I like walking in the park with my group of friends, women who have lived through as many battles as I have. I cook what I want when I want, and I spend my afternoons in my sewing room, surrounded by fabrics and threads that remind me that creativity still belongs to me. What frustrates me is how easily people dismiss women my age. My children talk as if living alone means I am weak or unsafe, as if age automatically makes me helpless. They say it is not healthy for me to be alone, but here is what they do not see. Being alone does not make me lonely, it makes me independent. There is a difference. My house is not too big for me. It is exactly the right size for a woman who has finally learned to enjoy her own company. Caleb stood in my living room that morning, speaking with the confidence of a man who believed he knew better than his mother. "Mom, this is temporary," he said, as if the word could soften the weight of what he was forcing on me. "It will only be until we find something bigger, and besides, it will be good for you. At your age, you should not be living alone. What if something happens to you and no one is there?" I had heard these lines before, the same script repeated whenever my children wanted to push me into something I had not chosen. First comes the fear, making me imagine myself collapsed and forgotten. Then comes the guilt, as if saying no would make me cold and selfish. Finally comes the urgency, temporary, just for a little while, as if I would not notice when temporary became permanent. But I had lived long enough to see the truth behind those words. When Caleb says temporary, he means until it is convenient for him. When he talks about my safety, he means his own comfort. And when he laughs at my protests, it is not because he thinks I am funny. It is because he believes my opinion no longer matters. That laugh was worse than any insult. It was the sound of a son who believed his mother could be managed like a piece of furniture, shifted around without asking. That night I could not sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the same thought repeating in my head. If I stayed silent, Caleb and his family would take over my home. My sewing room would become a playroom, the guest room would belong to Brianna's mother, and I would be left with nothing of my own. I had spent my life sacrificing. This time I needed to act differently. The next morning, before the sun was fully up, I picked up the phone and dialed my closest friend. Judith Morales was 68, a widow like me, and one of the strongest women I had ever known. We met years ago in the walking group at the park. She had listened to me through grief, and I had listened to her when her own daughter tried to move her into a smaller apartment against her will. Judith understood. She arrived at my house just after 7, carrying her calm energy the way some people carry a scarf. Over coffee, I told her everything. I described how Caleb walked in as if my house was already his. I repeated the way he laughed when I reminded him I was the one who paid for it. Judith sat quietly, nodding, letting me empty out the weight I carried, and then she asked one simple question: "What do you need me to do?" In that moment, I knew why Judith was my truest friend. She did not tell me I was overreacting. She did not scold me about family obligations. She simply offered her loyalty. I looked her in the eye and told her the truth. I have been preparing for this day. I already have a plan. 2 days later, Brianna showed up at my door with a bright smile and a box of donuts. She used the same sweet tone she always used when she wanted something from me. "Good morning, Mom," she said, as if we had always been close. "May I come in?" I stepped aside, and she walked into my kitchen as if the visit was nothing unusual. She placed the box on the table and began talking quickly. "We are almost ready for Saturday. The kids are so excited. Noah keeps asking about his new room, and Lily already picked out which bed she wants in the sewing room. My mom is so grateful she really cannot live alone anymore. You are doing such a wonderful thing for us." Her words were rehearsed, polished, and designed to sound like gratitude. But underneath, I heard the assumption the decision was already final. My house was no longer mine. I was a guest in my own story. I poured her coffee and let her finish her speech. Then I asked quietly, "Did you or Caleb ever ask me if I wanted this?" Her smile faltered. She shifted in her chair, looked down at her hands. "Caleb told me you were happy, that you thought it would be good company for you." I leaned forward. "I am not lonely, Brianna. I am overlooked. There is a difference." For the first time, her confidence cracked. She realized Caleb had not told her the truth. She left soon after, the donuts untouched on the table, her cheerful mask slipping. It was my first victory, small but real. Brianna now knew that I was not going to play the part of the silent, agreeable mother-in-law. That evening, Caleb came storming through my front door without ringing the bell. His face was tight with anger. "What did you say to Brianna?" he demanded, standing in the middle of my living room like a man used to being obeyed. She came home in tears. I set down my knitting and looked at him calmly. "I told her the truth, Caleb, that you never asked me if I agreed to any of this." He threw his hands up. "Mom, are you seriously going to make this difficult now? We have everything ready. We talked to the landlord. The kids already know. Now you are changing your mind." Being difficult. That is what he called it when I stood up for myself. I straightened in my chair. "Caleb, sit down. Let us talk like adults. I do not have time to talk. I just need you to cooperate." I shook my head. "I am not going to cooperate with something I never agreed to." His eyes narrowed. "What is wrong with you? You were never this selfish before." Selfish. The word cut deep, not because it was true, but because I had heard it every time I dared to put myself first. I took a breath. "I am not selfish, Caleb. I am not a spare room with a wallet attached. I am a woman who worked 40 years to own this home, and I will decide who lives in it." He tried one last time. "What if we pay rent? What if it is just temporary? What if we promise to respect your space?" "No, no, no." Every refusal was steady and clear. Saying no is not cruelty, Caleb, it is clarity. He stared at me, stunned, as if he was seeing a version of his mother he had never met before. The very next morning, Judith pulled up in her white sedan, ready to drive me where I needed to go. I locked my front door, not knowing how many more times I would step through it, and carried only a small handbag. We had a schedule to keep. Our first stop was the bank. For years I had kept a quiet savings account that none of my children knew about. Every month since my retirement, I had deposited a little extra money from sewing projects, hemming dresses, repairing curtains for neighbors. It was not a fortune, but it was steady. The manager greeted me with a polite smile. "Mrs. Crawford, how can we help you today?" "I need to make a transfer," I told her. "A large one." She tapped at her computer, raised her eyebrows, and then nodded. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "Completely sure." Judith squeezed my hand while we waited for the transaction to process. Our second stop was the office of Mark Ellison, the realtor who had been guiding me for weeks. "Mrs. Crawford, are you ready to sign?" he asked as we sat across his polished desk. "More than ready," I said. He slid the papers toward me, documents for both the sale of my current home and the purchase of a smaller, newer place in a quiet subdivision. I signed each page carefully. Helen Crawford. The signature of a woman who finally understood her worth. When it was done, Mark smiled. "You will have the keys to your new property tomorrow." I looked at Judith. "We did it," I whispered. At lunch afterward, over sandwiches and tea, Judith raised her glass. "To freedom," she said. I lifted mine, to finally choosing myself. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear. At 9 o'clock sharp, the rumble of a moving truck shook the street outside my house. I pulled back the curtain and saw Caleb driving, his face full of confidence. Behind him came Brianna's car with the children, and in the back seat sat her mother, Elaine, leaning on her cane. Another car followed with relatives ready to help. They came with the energy of people who believed everything was already settled. Boxes stacked high were unloaded onto the driveway. The kids ran excitedly toward the front door. Brianna called out orders and Caleb directed the movers as if he were the owner. I stepped outside, standing in the doorway, my hands steady. "Good morning," I said calmly. Caleb grinned. "Morning, Mom. We are here. Open the door wide so the guys can start unloading." I shook my head. "That will not be necessary." Silence fell. The movers looked at Caleb, then at me. "What do you mean?" Brianna asked, her arms full of bags. "You are not bringing anything into this house," I answered. Caleb's face flushed. "Are you crazy? Do you know how much we paid for the truck? Do you know everything we had to do to organize this? That is not my problem, Caleb. I never agreed to this." Elaine slowly climbed out of the car, her voice soft. "Where is my room?" "There is no room for you here, Mom," I said respectfully but firmly. One of the movers, an older man with gray hair, spoke quietly. "Mom, if this is your house and you do not want us to unload, we cannot do anything." Caleb turned red, shouting that I was cruel, threatening lawyers, accusing me of being senile. "Bring your lawyer," I said, "and bring documents proving this house belongs to you, because I have all of mine." At that moment, Judith's car pulled up. She walked toward me, steady and composed. "Everything all right, Helen?" she asked. "Everything is perfectly fine," I said, my voice clear. "They were just leaving." Caleb stared at me furious, but there was nothing more he could do. The movers loaded the boxes back onto the truck. They left humiliated, the plan crumbling before their eyes. I stood in the doorway of my home, feeling stronger than I ever had before. The next morning, I received a call from Mark Ellison. "Mrs. Crawford," he said cheerfully, "I have something for you." When I arrived at his office, he placed a small envelope on the desk. Inside were the keys to my new house. The weight of them in my hand felt different than any set of keys I had held before. They were not just metal, they were freedom. Judith met me at the old house to help me pack. We did not take much, only the essentials. A few dresses I loved, my important documents, a small box of photographs, my jewelry, and of course my sewing machine. Everything else could stay. For years, that house had been my dream, but now it had turned into a battlefield. I was ready to let it go. As we carried the boxes out to Judith's car, Miss Hart, my neighbor of 20 years, walked over from her yard. "Helen, is it true you are leaving?" she asked, concern in her eyes. "Yes," I said. "Today. And was all this because of Caleb?" She pressed gently. "It was not a fight," I told her. "It was a decision." She frowned. "Don't you feel bad leaving the house where you lived for so many years?" I looked her straight in the eye. "I feel worse for all the years I lived there without truly living." She did not fully understand, but she nodded and wished me luck. For the first time in decades, I felt I was moving forward by choice, not by duty. 2 days after I moved into my new house, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was polite but firm. "Mrs. Crawford, this is Patrick O'Neill, attorney for your son Caleb. My client wishes to contest the sale of your former property. He claims it was done in a state of emotional distress and without considering family rights." I almost laughed. Family rights? That house had been mine alone, paid with decades of my labor. I answered clearly. "Counselor, the property was in my name. I was of sound mind and I exercised my full legal right to sell it. There is no case here." He paused, then asked if I would consider a meeting to discuss compensation. "There is nothing to discuss." "Good day," I said, and hung up. 3 months later, my life had transformed. I had a steady routine in my new home. Each morning, I ate breakfast by the window looking out at my little garden. Twice a week, Judith came by and we walked or shared coffee. I signed up for a painting class at the community center and even opened an Instagram account to post pictures of my sewing projects. For the first time in my life, I had a financial cushion from the sale, and I no longer worried about being used. I felt lighter. Caleb had stopped calling every day. His lawyer called twice more, but I no longer answered. Life had moved forward. For the first time in decades, I was not defined by my role as someone's mother. I was simply Helen Crawford, and that was enough. One quiet Sunday afternoon, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, I found Noah and Lily standing there, my 8- and 6-year-old grandchildren. Their faces lit up. "Grandma," they shouted together, wrapping their arms around my waist. Behind them, parked at the curb, I noticed Caleb's car. He had not come to the door. He had sent the children. "Dad told us to say he misses you," Noah said quickly, glancing back at the car. I crouched down to their level. "And do you miss me?" They both nodded. "Why don't you live in the big house anymore?" Lily asked with wide eyes. Because I found a smaller house where I can be happier, I answered gently. Come see, I told them. Their eyes grew wide as I showed them my bright little kitchen, the cozy living room, and finally my sewing room, neatly arranged with colorful fabrics. It's so pretty, Lily said. Can you teach us to sew, Grandma? Of course, I smiled. When your parents say it's fine, you can come on weekends. We baked cookies together, watched cartoons, and took selfies that I later posted online. For an hour, there were no arguments, no pressure, just the joy of being a grandmother again. When Caleb and Brianna finally came to the door, they looked worn down, tired in a way I had not seen before. Caleb spoke quietly. Mom, can we talk? It's not to argue. I just want to say I was wrong. I never asked what you wanted. I studied his face. It was not a perfect apology, but it was real. I nodded. The children can visit whenever they want. Caleb. But remember this, they will come as my guests, not as my obligation. Respect must always be part of the agreement. That night, after the children left and the house was quiet again, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom. I saw a 70-year-old woman staring back at me, but she was not the same woman from a year ago. This Helen Crawford had learned the power of one word, no. At last I was fluent in it. I thought about everything that had happened. For decades I believed being useful was the same as being loved, that sacrifice was the only way to keep a family together. But the truth is different. Help is a gift, not a duty. Respect is not optional, it is the foundation. And age does not mean surrendering the right to live as you choose. In the weeks that followed, I began to sew again, not out of obligation but out of joy. I stitched pillowcases with Noah and Lily's names embroidered on them, ready for the weekends when they would come to visit. I wanted them to know that love from a grandmother comes freely but never at the cost of her dignity. As I turned off the light, I felt peace settle in my chest. For the first time in 70 years, I was not living to meet someone else's expectations. I was living for myself. If this story reminded you of a boundary you need to draw or redraw, share it in the comments below. Tell me where you are watching from. And if you believe in choosing dignity over pressure, tap like, share this video, and subscribe to The Art of Revenge. More stories are waiting for you.